Welcome to another deep dive. Today we are looking at this massive stack of sources, historical analyses, sociopolitical commentaries, and translations of this incredibly influential ancient text.
The Book of Exodus.
Exactly, the Book of Exodus.
Mhm.
And you think about this story, your mind probably jumps straight to like Charlton Heston.
Oh, for sure. The movie.
Right. Grandiose cinematic images, lightning flashing on a mountaintop, seas parting in half. We tend to treat it like this mythical spectacle.
We really do. It often gets flattened into this, untouchable legend. Like, it's just a story of supernatural magic rather than a story of gritty, complex humanity.
Yeah.
And when we do that, I mean, we really distance ourselves from the actual historical mechanics at play here.
Which is a shame, because if you strip away all those cinematic special effects and look closely at the research you shared of us today, it's wild.
It is.
What you are left with is this terrifyingly precise blueprint. A blueprint of how a society collapses into a paranoid totalitarian state.
Yes, and the immense, chaotic human cost of climbing out of it.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because we aren't just looking at ancient history here.
Yeah.
We are looking at the anatomy of an oppressive system and, honestly, the astonishing courage it takes to dismantle it.
Yeah. So to understand how this whole society collapsed, we really have to look at the political trigger.
Right.
The text explicitly states that there arose a new king over Egypt who knew not Joseph.
And Joseph, just for context for everyone listening, he was the Israelite who had, generations earlier, saved Egypt from a catastrophic famine.
Exactly. He was this deeply integrated, celebrated figure, but suddenly there's this regime change.
A completely new administration.
Right. And this new pharaoh looks at the minority Israelite population, who had originally come as refugees, by the way, and says, "Behold, the people of the children of Israel are too many and too mighty for us."
Which is just pure demographic anxiety.
Absolutely.
The pharaoh is terrified that, in the event of a war, this minority group might ally with Egypt's enemies. So the state's response to this fear is to completely redesign their society to crush them.
Right. They pivot straight to subjugation.
Yeah, our sources detail how they set taskmasters over the Israelites, forcing them into brutal state-sponsored labor.
Building Pithom and Ramses.
Yes, which historical records suggest were these massive military and agricultural supply centers, essentially storage cities for the empire's wealth.
And that labor environment, it wasn't merely about extracting free work. I mean, it was a calculated method of psychological subjugation.
Break the mind to break the body.
Exactly. Because a subjugated mind is far less likely to rebel than a free one.
Which brings us to a part of the research that just absolutely fascinates me because it feels so startlingly modern.
The straw mandate.
The straw mandate, yes.
Yeah.
So later in the timeline, when Moses and his brother Aaron first go to Pharaoh and demand that the people be allowed to go into the wilderness to hold a spiritual festival.
Pharaoh doesn't just say no.
Right. Pharaoh's response isn't just a simple rejection. He initiates this devastating campaign of psychological and economic warfare.
The administrative cruelty of that mandate is just staggering, honestly. To make mud bricks in the ancient world, you desperately needed straw to bind the clay together.
Otherwise, they just fall apart, right?
Exactly. Otherwise, the bricks would shatter in the sun.
So Pharaoh tells the taskmasters to completely stop providing the straw. The workers now have to go scavenge the entire country for their own materials.
But, and this is the key part, they have to produce the exact same amount.
Yes, that is the kicker. Pharaoh mandates that they must produce the exact same daily quota of bricks. He literally calls them idle and lazy for daring to dream of spiritual freedom.
It's incredibly manipulative.
Reading this, my mind instantly went to modern burnout.
Oh, totally.
It is the ancient equivalent of this toxic corporate environment where, executive management slashes a team's budget, takes away their software tools.
But demands the exact same quarterly revenue.
Exactly. Intentionally designing a system to break the workers' spirits and make them feel like any failure is entirely their own fault.
The burnout analogy captures the psychological toll perfectly. But we do have to remember the Egyptian system went a step further into sheer physical brutality.
Right. Real physical violence.
Yeah. Autocracies thrive by turning the oppressed against one another. So Pharaoh's system deliberately appointed Israelite officers to manage the labor of their own people.
Oh.
Yeah, and when the impossible brick quotas inevitably weren't met, The Egyptian taskmasters didn't just beat the laborers, they viciously beat the Israelite officers.
So the state forces the victims to manage their own abuse.
Exactly.
They've essentially weaponized the labor to destroy any internal solidarity the Israelites might have had.
That is the most insidious part. The Israelite officers are pushed to the brink. They actually go to Pharaoh, crying out, "Why dealest thou thus with thy servants? There is no straw, and thy servants are beaten."
And Pharaoh just doesn't care.
He coldly reiterates that they are lazy. This creates a complete fracture in their societal bonds. The battered Israelite officers actually turn on Moses and Aaron.
Blaming them.
Right, blaming them for making them abhorred in the eyes of Pharaoh. The regime successfully uses trauma to breed mutual resentment.
These people are physically and emotionally broken at this point, which makes the rebellion that eventually sparks even more incredible to me.
It really is.
Because when the state's exploitation failed to stop the Israelite population from growing, the oppression shifted from forced labor to, well, mandated infanticide.
Yeah, things escalate horrifyingly.
And this brings us to the first moments of real, jaw-dropping courage in our sources.
The royal decree is chilling in its efficiency. The absolute monarch commands the Hebrew midwives to kill all newborn males right on the birth stool.
But they don't do it.
No, they don't.
The sources name these two women Shifra and Puah. And I find it incredibly telling that these two midwives are historically named, while the supposedly omnipotent Pharaoh is left completely anonymous in the text.
That's a great point. It's a deliberate narrative choice.
The text says they feared God and refused to follow the king's orders. And when Pharaoh hauls them in and demands to know why the boys are surviving,
They look the most powerful man on earth in the eye.
yeah, and deliver this incredibly clever, almost sarcastic defiance. They tell him, because the Hebrew women are not as the Egyptian women, for they are lively, and are delivered ere the midwife come unto them.
It is a profound subversion of power dynamics. We often think that true resistance against a massive empire requires an army.
Right, swords and shields.
Exactly. But these historical accounts suggest it actually begins with individuals deciding that a higher moral law supersedes the unjust laws of the land.
Wow.
Totalitarian regimes rely on the illusion of absolute, inescapable control. But Shifra, Puah, and soon after, Moses' own mother.
Who takes a desperate risk to hide him in a waterproof basket in the reeds of the Nile.
Right. They demonstrate that autocracies always have blind spots.
The regime completely underestimated the power of domestic maternal spaces.
They really did. By focusing the narrative on these specific women, the text is declaring who actually holds historical weight.
It wasn't the men with the chariots.
No. It was the women with the moral courage to secretly keep the future alive.
And the courage of those women literally saved the life of the man who would eventually dismantle the entire system, Moses.
That's right.
But stepping into that leadership role wasn't some seamless transition for him. Moses is a man caught between two worlds.
Absolutely.
He was saved by Hebrew women, but raised in the very Egyptian palace that ordered his death. I mean, that has to create a massive identity crisis.
It creates a deeply conflicted, reluctant leader. Moses has this inherent sense of justice, but he is completely untethered.
Yeah.
We see this early on when he witnesses an Egyptian beating a Hebrew laborer. He acts on instinct, striking down the Egyptian.
And then he has to flee.
Right, he flees to the desert land of Midian, and there he courageously defends the 7 daughters of a local priest from aggressive shepherds at a well. He clearly cannot stand by when the vulnerables are exploited.
But having the instinct to break up a fight at a well is fundamentally different from, taking down a global superpower.
That is the crux of his hesitation. When he encounters the burning bush, this phenomenon the text notes is burning with fire but remarkably not consumed, he is terrified.
I would be too.
He is told that the groaning of the Israelites has been heard, and he is the one being sent to Pharaoh to bring them out. And Moses' immediate response is a wave of intense imposter syndrome.
Right. He asks, who am I that I should go unto Pharaoh? He's basically saying, I'm a fugitive hiding in the desert. You have the completely wrong guy.
He feels entirely inadequate. But the narrative shifts the focus here. It frames the impending struggle not as a political negotiation between Moses and Pharaoh, but as a cosmic clash between a higher power and the entire Egyptian system.
And what follows are the 10 plagues, culminating in the escape. But let's talk about those plagues for a second, because the sources we are looking at point out something really fascinating.
The target.
Yes. When you read the list, water turning to blood, frogs, gnats, flies, livestock disease, boils, hail, locusts, total darkness, and the devastating death of the firstborn, it reads like a random horror movie.
There's chaos.
Exactly. But the historical analysis shows this was actually highly targeted.
It was systematic theological warfare. To the ancient Egyptian mind, their gods weren't just abstract concepts. They were the literal forces holding their society together.
Wow, okay.
Every single plague was a surgical strike against a specific Egyptian deity.
So turning the Nile to blood wasn't just to make them thirsty.
No, it was a direct humiliation of Hapi, the god of the Nile, who was supposed to bring life and fertility.
Oh, wow.
And the plague of darkness, that was a direct attack on Ra, the supreme sun god. The narrative is methodically proving that the entire Egyptian power structure, built on these supposedly invincible deities, is completely powerless.
And it ultimately culminates at the crossing of the Red Sea. The plagues are behind them, they're marching out, but suddenly they see Pharaoh's 600 chosen chariots bearing down on them.
And the Israelites completely panic.
Total panic. They turn on Moses and say, "Because there were no graves in Egypt, hast thou taken us away to die in the wilderness? It were better for us to serve the Egyptians."
It's heartbreaking.
They are standing on the precipice of a miracle, and they are literally begging to go back to the brickyards.
This highlights the core psychological tragedy of the story, really. Taking the people out of Egypt was a matter of logistics.
Right.
But getting Egypt out of the people, dismantling their deeply ingrained fear, their subservience, their absolute reliance on their former masters, that was the true agonizing battle.
Because that doesn't just disappear overnight.
Exactly. When you have been treated as an object of labor for centuries, freedom doesn't feel like liberation at first. It feels like a terrifying void.
So they cross the sea, the waters crash down on the Egyptian chariots. The external enemy is definitively wiped out. You'd think it's happily ever after.
But it's not.
No. Looking at the timeline in our sources, the real nightmare is just beginning. Because now, this traumatized population has to figure out how to govern themselves in a barren desert.
The wilderness becomes a pressure cooker.
Yeah.
Almost immediately, we see a reversion to a twisted nostalgia for their oppression. At locations they eventually name Massa and Mirabah.
Which translate to places of testing and quarreling.
Right. They murmur against Moses because they're thirsty and hungry. They long for what they call the flesh pots and the predictable bread of Egypt.
Which reveals a shocking psychological reality, doesn't it?
It does. Human beings will frequently prefer the agonizing certainty of slavery over the terrifying responsibility of freedom.
It's the devil you know concept taken to its absolute extreme.
Yeah.
And this anxiety reaches a boiling point with the infamous incident of the golden calf.
Oh, yes.
Moses goes up the mountain to receive the societal laws, and he's delayed. The people panic. They demand a physical, tangible God.
They strip off their gold jewelry.
Cast a molten calf and declare, "This is thy God, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt."
The golden calf is the ultimate manifestation of their inability to handle the abstract nature of freedom.
Because they couldn't see it.
Exactly. They couldn't yet tolerate an invisible, decentralized authority. They needed something they could touch, so they essentially built a replica of an Egyptian idol, because that was the only visual language of power they really understood.
Okay, wait, I have to pause you here.
Sure.
Because I am genuinely confused by what happens next, and I want to push back on the text a bit here.
Go ahead.
We're looking at this narrative of people escaping a brutal autocrat. But the moment things fall apart, Moses comes down the mountain, sees this idol worship, and orders a faction fiercely loyal to him, the Levites, to sweep through the camp.
And 3,000 people end up slaughtered.
Yes, 3,000 people. That sounds completely tyrannical. How do we reconcile Moses ordering a massacre with him supposedly being the liberator? I mean, how is he any different from Pharaoh in that moment?
It is an incredibly brutal scene, and your discomfort is exactly what historians grapple with when analyzing this text. The ancient sources do not sugarcoat the violence of establishing a new society.
Clearly not.
The distinction sociologists make here is the difference between exploitation and preservation.
Okay.
Pharaoh used violence to maintain an economy of continuous enslavement. Moses, coming down the mountain, is facing the complete and immediate dissolution of a fragile new society into total anarchy.
So it was about saving the group.
The slaughter by the Levites is framed as a desperate, ruthless excision of a faction that was dragging the entire population back into the ideological chains of Egypt.
Wow.
It is a harsh reality of antiquity. Establishing a new order often came with devastating internal bloodshed.
Okay, so it's a desperate move to stop the entire social experiment from collapsing in the desert. But clearly, Moses can't sustain society by ruling through crisis like that.
No, he can't.
The burden of leadership nearly breaks him. Which brings us to the intervention of his father-in-law, Jethro.
Jethro is a fascinating figure.
He visits the camp and watches Moses sit from morning to evening, personally judging every single civil dispute among this massive population. And Jethro looks at him and basically says, "What are you doing? You are going to burn out, and you are going to take the people down with you."
Jethro provides a masterclass in civic infrastructure right there.
He really does.
He tells Moses frankly that what he is doing is not good. It is too heavy a burden for one person. He advises Moses to select able individuals, men of truth, hating unjust gain, and place them as rulers of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens.
A completely tiered system.
Exactly. These decentralized judges will handle the everyday matters, and only the most difficult cases will escalate to Moses.
I look at that and I see the ultimate cure for founders syndrome.
Oh, absolutely.
You see this in modern tech startups or sweeping social movements all the time. A charismatic leader has the intense vision required to break out of the old system. But scaling that movement, surviving the messy wilderness phase of growth,
You cannot micromanage a free society.
you just can't. It requires trusting other people and empowering a decentralized network.
And that transition highlights a profound lesson about the nature of a free society. Freedom is exhausting work.
Yeah.
Under Pharaoh, you didn't have to make ethical decisions. The taskmaster's whip made them for you. But Jethro introduces a revolutionary concept, a delegated justice system based on morality, character, and truth, rather than physical force.
It's a huge shift.
The contrast between the rigid, brutal control of Egypt and this new distributed system of self-governance is staggering. It requires personal responsibility from the rulers of tens all the way up to the rulers of thousands.
So a legal framework keeps people from destroying each other. But after all the trauma, the burnout in Egypt, the terror at the Red Sea, the bloodshed after the Golden Calf, a legal system alone doesn't heal a fractured community.
No, it doesn't.
They need a shared purpose. We've seen how they were forced to build supply cities for Pharaoh and how they disastrously built an idol out of sheer panic. But the text ends by showing us what healthy collective effort actually looks like.
With the building of the tabernacle.
Yes, their traveling sanctuary.
The construction of the tabernacle is a brilliant socio-political pivot. Moses calls upon two master artisans named Bezalel and Oholiab, alongside every wise-hearted person whose heart stirred them up to do the work.
It is a complete inversion of the labor camps of Egypt.
Completely.
They aren't scavenging for straw while being beaten by taskmasters.
Far from it. Moses asks for a free will offering, and the ancient text gives us this incredibly restorative detail. Every man and woman whose heart made them willing brought gold, silver, brass, spun goat's hair, purple and scarlet yarn.
Just bringing what they had.
Yes, they brought it voluntarily every single morning until Moses actually had to tell them to stop because they had brought too much.
So what does this all mean for you if we look at the entire arc of the research we've covered today? The ultimate victory over Egypt wasn't just walking through the parted waters of the Red Sea. It was transforming their fundamental relationship with labor and with each other. They moved from making bricks under the thread of a whip to voluntarily weaving and carving and building something beautiful for a shared higher purpose.
They reclaimed their agency.
They really did.
That reclamation is the true exodus. The physical departure was merely step one. The psychological departure was finally realized when they learned to give freely and build collectively without a dictator standing over them.
To wrap up this deep dive into these sources, looking at this ancient text is like holding up a mirror to the mechanics of human society.
It really is.
It shows us the precise anatomy of oppressive systems, how they use impossible quotas and mutual suspicion to break people down. But it also highlights the absolute necessity of individual moral courage.
Like the midwives.
Exactly. Systems like Pharaoh's crumble when everyday people, like the midwives Shifra and Pua, decide that doing the right thing is more important than following an evil law. And finally, it shows us the building of free society is messy, complicated work.
It's a wilderness.
It requires overcoming our own nostalgia for the past, learning to share leadership, and choosing to build together voluntarily.
It is a remarkably dense and relevant text, and as we close today, I want to leave you with one final fascinating detail from the historical record to ponder on your own.
Ah, good thought.
In the narrative, there is a tiny, easily overlooked mention that when the Israelites finally marched out of Egypt, a mixed multitude went up with them.
A mixed multitude.
Yes. It wasn't just the Israelite descendants. True liberation movements rarely happen in a vacuum. Who were these outsiders?
That's a great question.
Were they other enslaved minorities? Disillusioned Egyptians who had seen through Pharaoh's propaganda? We don't entirely know, but it suggests a powerful truth. When people bravely march out of oppressive systems, their courage becomes contagious.
It ripples outwards.
Exactly. It attracts others from entirely different backgrounds who also yearn to be free. Which leaves us with this thought to ponder. What mixed multitude might you inspire if you boldly step out of your own Egypt?